really odd times, I'm sure you'll agree. And how do we cope with this? How do we manage it? And how do we maybe try and make it work to our advantage? Let's find out. A few days ago, we spoke to John Bullock. He runs a company called Solutions Focus. And what they do is essentially help people and businesses cope with change. And John's back with us on BBC Radio Stoke this lunchtime. Hi, John. How are you today?
Hi, Stuart. I'm very, very well, thank you. How are you?
I think I'm all right, thanks. I think it's one of those things we sort of gloss over it, don't we, and say, yeah, we're fine, I'm great, thanks, John, great. But the more you reflect on it and the more you think about it, the more you start to question how you're actually doing.
Absolutely. It's a really good point, actually. Just even if we take out the current situation, one of the things that I talk to people quite a lot about is the way that we greet each other. In this country, we're not, I mean, you just answered me in a really great way, but a lot of people, if we say, if somebody says, how are you? And you kind of go, I'm okay, thanks. Well, that when you say okay, that's the instruction you give your brain. So your brain will then aim for okay in the day rather than great, remarkable, or happy, or whatever else you want to be. Sometimes we say great, that's okay, that's great. Sometimes people kind of go, how are you? And people go, fair to middling. My personal favourite is surviving. And the problem with that is that, yes, we can have a chuckle about it, but if you tell your brain that, your brain then aims for that during the day. And I would not like to just survive all day, to be honest. Now bringing into this situation, to the point that you've just made, I think there is a lot of people that are saying they're okay and saying they're great because it's the kind of thing that you need to do to put a face on. But then, as you've rightly said, we start reflecting and we actually start talking to ourselves in quite a hindering way and reminding ourselves that actually we're not very great at the moment. And then the problem is, whatever we say to ourselves, it comes out in our behaviour and our emotions and our actions. And we start talking ourselves into not feeling great. And not feeling very, very well. It's actually something that we use called the TIA cycle: thinking, emotion, actions, results. And it works in that order. So your thought, the spark, if you like, in the brain, that releases chemical, which is the emotion. The emotion makes you feel a certain way and gives you energy or less energy. And then you take some action and you get your results. And if we're getting the results that we don't particularly want at the moment, we can't just change our actions, which is what a lot of people try to do. We try and go, let's just change the way we're doing things, our actions, and everything will be okay. Unfortunately, if you change actions, results only change short term because it's the thinking that needs to be changed, and that's a little bit more challenging to do. It's definitely doable, but there's a little bit more of a challenge in there to do it.
What strikes me in what you're saying here, though, John, is we've kind of got this balance, haven't we, between recognising this whole, and we've heard it a few times over the last few months, it's okay to not be okay, against talking yourself into a situation where you're really not okay. How do we balance those out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think first thing is I'm coming across a lot of people that are beating themselves up at the moment. So what they're doing is because they're not feeling great or they're out of routine and maybe they don't understand those stages of change, which we can mention again if that would be useful. I know we chatted about it last time. If people don't realise where they are in that change curve, instead of feeling down, going, right, it's okay that I feel like this for a little while, what can I do about it? Their internal dialogue is, I feel rubbish, I shouldn't feel rubbish, I should be able to do it. And actually, you get a bit of a double whammy because you feel rubbish in the first place, and then you beat yourself up and feel even more rubbish. So you get into this bit of a negative, hindering cycle of self-talk and emotion, and that's then quite difficult to break. There's a neurological reason why it's difficult to break a habit in your head. It's when you create a habit, it's normally by repetition. However, if you add very large emotion into that repetition, the habit is formed quicker and easier. But so if people have been feeling down and beating themselves up, they've now formed a habit of hindering thinking and emotion. And then to change that habit, what we have to do in the head, the neurology around this, is we have to physically change the pathway. In other words, we have to move electricity down a different path. The only problem is, as most people will know, electricity takes the path of least resistance. So if you've got a big formed pathway in your brain, your electricity likes to go down that pathway because it's the path of least resistance. If you then start to try to change that habit, it can take 4 to 6 to 8 weeks and some repetition and things called triggers that we can use. But until the new pathway becomes the larger pathway, the new path of least resistance, we do get stuck into this little bit of a cycle of self-talk, and then we beat ourselves up for it and we make it doubly worse at the same time. So the key really here is to try and change that self. First of all, as you've mentioned, recognise where you are in the transition, the changes. And I also noted earlier on the lead up to the session here that you'd mentioned about people have gone through a change and now they're going through another change. That is majorly important. It's a really, really important point because they might have been through the transition curve and now they're hitting another one. So there's a danger they could then go back into that negative, hindering self-talk cycle.
We'll talk more about this new change with the new guidance and the new thinking and the new sort of way forward out of the current situation in just a moment. If you want to speak to John this lunchtime, 0800 121 8080, just about how you're feeling. And if you are in a position where you're going through a change of some kind, and I think we all are one way or another, 81333 Stoke and your message.
BBC Radio Stoke.
More about how you manage change and what's going on inside your head on the way next.
Sophie Calvert. Sandbach School's technology department is making personal protective equipment for the NHS. They're after more polypropylene and rigid PVC.
We were listening to Sophie Saturday morning. We heard a plea coming out for acrylic materials, and we've got some good suppliers of material. Brilliant that David managed to get in touch with us and offer some materials that we've actually been using this morning. At the school, we've managed to assemble 600 advisors that are going to go out this afternoon to various places across the region.
Sophie Calvert. Saturday mornings from 6. BBC Radio Stoke. The sound of where we live. And all the music you love. BBC Radio Stoke.
Great song on the way from Jerry Rafferty in a few minutes' time. Probably not the one you think it'll be either. First, back to John Bullock, who's talking about dealing with change and how we, to a point, can control things that maybe we don't think we can control. And is that a point here, John, that so much of what's going on seems to be out of our individual control? Governments around the world can't control this. The scientists haven't got a grasp of it yet. It could just feel like it's all spiralling away from us.
Yeah, it's a really good point that you raised there, Stuart. There's a couple of things that really trigger change and give people a negative response to it. And one is a perceived loss of control, and the other is a perceived loss of involvement. And we those both are in play, unfortunately, at the moment. We're having governments and governing bodies making decisions almost for us. Obviously, that one of the main reasons the government decided to do a daily update was no doubt their psychological advisors had told people, because actually, if you watch the update, the majority of the update is actually repeated information for people. Yes, there's a kind of 10-minute slot of new updates, but the graphs are updated and all that kind of stuff. But it's relatively similar information. However, if you can give people regular information and make them feel involved, it helps people with change. So that's, in my mind, that's no doubt one of the reasons why they're doing that. So the thing really isn't to, and I know this is very easy to say, but it isn't to think about what we can't do. It's to think about what we can do. So instead of thinking about and worrying about everything that's outside of our control, what can we control? And earlier on in the show, you mentioned a bit of a fact that I would follow, and I think your words were something like it's not the fact, it's how we deal with it. So it's not the fact, it's how we react, actually. And you're absolutely right there. We can't we can't always control the outside world, but we can control the internal picture that we have. And we do that by the way that we talk to ourselves. And I know this is a little bit cliche and people have probably heard the phrase self-talk. But on average, we talk to ourselves every 7 seconds. And that's a lot of internal dialogue that goes on in our head during the day. And if there's any of your listeners sitting there now thinking to themselves, I'm not sure I do that, then they've just done it. We don't even realise sometimes when we are talking to ourselves. And that internal dialogue is either helpful or hindering to us. Now, I'm purposely using those terms. I'm not using the term here positive and negative, because positive and negative it's a description of attitude, not the way we think. And attitude's something very, very different. It's a choice. But when we think, will this thought help me get through the day, or is it going to hinder me getting through the day? And if we've got lots of hindering thoughts at the moment because we've fallen into that cycle I mentioned before, what we need to try and do is remember that cycle: thinking, emotions, actions, results. We need to start with the thinking. We need to change the self-talk. One way we can change that will be very easy for anybody listening today is to use something called triggers or affirmations, sometimes they're called, or small goals, whichever way you want to call these things. But what triggers do, they're designed to trigger the electrochemical information in your brain and shoot it down a different pathway. So maybe when you're starting to feel down or low, either say something to yourself or see something visually or listen to some music. Just before I came on, you were playing Eurythmics, absolutely brilliant song, and it made me feel a little bit better because I haven't heard it for a while. So whether it's audio, visual, or something that you say in your head, if you can put that trigger around you, somewhere in your house that maybe you go to that place 2 times a day. So, for instance, I don't know about anybody else, but your fridge. I'm certainly in my fridge more than 2 times a day at the moment. So maybe it's your fridge. Maybe it's when you wake up and you've got a little statement. My daughter, many, many years ago, my eldest, bought me a little picture that's right by my bed. And it says, think happy, be happy. And that's the first thing I see when I get up in the morning. And when I get up and I'm a bit tired and I haven't slept very well and I've got a long day and everything else, it's the first thing that I see. And what it does is it just gives me a choice on how I can choose the way I'm going to think that day. So I would urge people, if they're feeling a bit down and their thoughts are hindering, triggers is a very, very simple way of being able to do it. The hard thing about triggers is actually putting them in place. So get a glass of wine or a coffee or a cup of tea, sit down and think, what makes you happy? And maybe get a picture or a little phrase and dot them around your house. Because if you see them 3 times a day, it starts to build a pathway in your brain. And at some point, that pathway might overtake some of your hindering pathways and it become the new path of least resistance, and you'll start to feel happier because, remember, thinking affects emotions on the back of it.
I'm worried now, though, John, that I'm going to have pictures of chocolate bars all around the house.
It's quite interesting, actually, because the other thing that I'm coming across at the moment is people's energy levels. I think you actually mentioned it again earlier in the show. We certainly talked about it last time. People feeling a bit lethargic and things like that. We actually have 4 energy zones. We have something called the performance zone, the recovery zone. They are both positive energy zones. So when you're in performance, you are confident, passionate, energetic. When you are in recovery, you are peaceful, mellow, relaxed. But then you've got 2 negative zones as well. So you've got burnout, which is, as it says, exhausted, worn out, which, to be honest, a majority of a lot of us were actually in that zone before lockdown because we're all running at 1,000,000 miles an hour like society tells us, and we get into burnout zone. But instead of moving into recovery zone when we went into lockdown and maybe you were furloughed and maybe you had more time on your hands, instead of going, do you know what, I'm going to use this time to chill out, I'm going to relax, I'm going to get a bit more sleep, I'm going to do a few things for me. Instead of doing that, what we've done is we've gone into the other negative energy zone, which is called the survival zone, which is when you are tense or frustrated or anxious or fearful. And that's because people don't like change. So we can move between these zones, but it's a conscious change in the brain, and triggers will help people do that gradually over a little bit of time.
And this sort of linguistic side of it, which I think is partly neuro-linguistic programming and things like that, the words we use make a real difference, you've been saying. There's an interesting one that I've wondered about, and it's people who feel they're stuck at home rather than people who feel they're safe at home.
Absolutely. That is such a great example. And you're absolutely right to link this to NLP. It's all about those instructions. I'm stuck at home rather than I can relax at home. It's a joy to be home. And let's face it, if we're honest, there's a good amount of the population that if you ask them 6-7 weeks ago, would they like to spend a bit more time at home and have a little bit of more life balance than work balance? The answer would probably have been yes. But now, because it's been enforced on us and it's not been our conscious choice, our language has changed to I'm stuck at home and I can't do anything, rather than I'm at home and what can I do?
Where's that list of jobs I've been stocking up for the last 3 years that I need to do at home? That kind of thing. Yeah.
100%. Not just the list of jobs, because some people I talk to have a list of jobs, but are struggling to then do those jobs because they've put themselves into that hindering mindset in the first place. So yes, you need the list of jobs, but you also need the self-talk and the triggers to be able to then go and action those things. Thinking, emotions, actions, results.
We've talked in the last 20 minutes about sort of change for individuals and this idea that not being in control of change can be a difficult thing. Your day job and what your business is about is companies and managing change within companies. We've heard the announcement this morning that JCB is about to consult on potentially 950 staff job losses. 500 agency workers could be let go. There'll be lots of people very concerned about that at the moment. Any thoughts for them?
Yeah, again, it's a really good question. And one of the key reasons, I mean, don't get me wrong, being made redundant is awful. It's happened to me in my career. I've been through it twice. When I worked for big corporates, I've also made people redundant. So I've been on the other side of the coin, and neither is a very nice position to be in. If you remember last time, Stuart, we spoke very briefly about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the two basic needs are physiological and security. The moment your job is under threat, those two needs start to wobble. So you are then not able to build self-esteem on the back of that. And unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, a lot of people, their main generation of self-esteem is their job. So when I was made redundant for the first time, I was about 24, I think, at the time. My whole life was my job. So when that was taken away from me, I didn't have anything else left in my life. And I had to find new ways of building. I think I actually re-landscaped my garden the 5 weeks that I didn't have a job because I had to do something to build self-esteem. So look, I can't give anybody advice, on, if they lose the job. I'm sure there's lots of technical advice people can have. From a psychological point of view, what I would say to them, and they may not feel like doing this right now because their job's under threat, they're probably still in shock, they might be in denial that it's actually happening at the moment. But when they start to come down that change curve to realization, my advice would be find things to do that can build your self-esteem in the meantime, of trying to get another job if that's possible. Because to look after your mental health during that time is majorly important. It runs into a concept that I call POMO. It's something that footballers use sometimes, a position of most opportunity. When a striker scores a goal and somebody goes, well, he was lucky the ball came straight to him. You'll often find it's not luck. That striker has worked very hard all game to get himself into the position of most opportunity to score that goal at that time. When you are going through redundancy, you're looking for another job, it's very, very important, not only for your own mental health to keep that right, but if you do keep that right, you will be in the position of most opportunity to get your next job, to see the next opportunity that comes along. Because when we're in a hindering mindset, we don't see opportunities. We don't see them right in front of us. So to get into POMO, position of most opportunity, it's even more important, as well as building self-esteem, to look after your mental health during this time. And that's probably the advice I would give on that.
And you, just hearing what you're saying there, as a business, you've done your POMO thing by taking it all online at the moment while you can't go around talking to firms face to face. And I know some of what you're doing there is free and available to all of us. Where can people find out what you're doing and maybe find out more about some of the things you've talked about this afternoon?
So if people go to our website, we've got a dedicated online development page for individuals and for businesses. If you go to www.solution, stoke-focused.co.uk and click on online development. You'll find it all there. We have 2 free webinars going out live on Tuesday evening next week. One is directed at key workers maintaining motivation and positivity through COVID-19, and one is for furloughed people keeping motivated and confident and building self-esteem whilst furloughed. They're both free. One's at 6 o'clock, one's at 7 o'clock on Tuesday night. And if you go to that website, you'll be able to register.
I always feel when we've only spoken twice, John, but afterwards I always feel better. And I always feel like I'll have a pint of whatever he's having because you're just so full of energy. It's fabulous.
It's great. You know, I did an hour session yesterday, and some of the feedback. What would you like? Would you like more of this? And somebody, I'd like 8 hours of John. Believe me, ask any of my family members. You might not want me for the whole 8 hours, because. Quite interestingly, you said, I've got into position of most opportunity by taking it all online. Yes, I have, Stuart, but I didn't do it straight away. It took me about 2 weeks to go through that transition, and I went through it like everybody else goes through it. And I had some hindering thoughts, and I felt bad for a little while. It's just that I teach this stuff, so I was able to probably recognise it a little bit quicker than a lot of people because I have the benefit of talking about it most of the time. But don't be under the illusion. I kind of went, oh, well, what's the opportunity here? It doesn't quite work that way. So you have to go through that transition and don't beat yourself up for it and then try and recognise it and get out of it in the quickest possible time. And I appreciate the feedback. Thank you, Stuart.
No, it's good to know you're human too, John. Thanks for your time today. Absolutely. Stay safe. Take care. Okay. Solution-focused.co.uk to find out more about what John does. And if you want to take part in either of those 2 webinars on Tuesday night, we've got details here. They are free here at BBC Radio Stoke. Just give us a ring and we'll point you in the right direction. 0800 121 8080. This is Jerry Rafferty, Night Owl on BBC Radio Stoke.